колеги, дозвольте розпочати. Ми раді від імені Українського кризового медіа-центру вітати вас на нашому заході. Я дякую тим журналістам, які приїхали з Одеської, Донецької, з Херсонської областей до нас. Не буду забирати багато часу, просто пару хвилин.
I've talked to some of the speakers. I would like to say, dear colleagues and journalists, that we are our target audience. That is quite unusual format of the roundtable, which reminds more of the expert discussion and questions and answers session. And we believe that we need to start such a format because our work, the work of the UCMC in the regions, demonstrates a low interest of colleagues journalists in the topics of European integration. On our behalf, we draw conclusion that this is probably because there's no needed messages from the state. There's nothing that could explain that all the process of Eurointegration that is something about our everyday life. Whatever number of regulation or doctrine is mentioned at briefings, but behind this number there's always our life, the life of the citizens of Ukraine. And when we were talking with the representatives of the governmental office, we understand that they are ready to talk only about achievements and victories, and there are not so many of them. But we are ready to talk about what we'll be facing. And what we need to discuss is adaptation of our legislation and that is why we designed this meeting. We divided it into two parts. First will be dedicated to two topics, which the speakers will talk about. And these topics are of interest for every person, irrespective of where the person lives, in which part of Ukraine, in rural area or in the city. I would like to introduce our speakers, and these are Hlib Strygunenko, who will start our discussion. He's the head of the Committee for Cooperation with the EU in selected sectors of the economy of the Government Office for European and Euro-Atlantic Integration. Yevhen Katkov, head of e-Government Department. Taras Huk, lawyer, expert on public organization lead office. Oleksandr Semenetz, Deputy Director of the Department and Head of the Department of Ecological Safety, Environmental Safety and Waste Management. Alla Wojciechowska, who's the ecologist of the NGO Ecology Lawman, and Anna Golubkovska-Anisimova, chairman of the Coordination Council of the public organization Mama 86. So we'll be talking about ecology and transportation. And we believe that no one, all should be interested in understanding what we mean. We requested our speakers to speak so that people can understand. You will have an opportunity to ask questions in the second part. Well, we will have 5 minutes break after the first panel, and in the second panel we have a good speaker from Estonian. There will be 3 more experts working with you, and they will tell you about how you can prepare the material which will be interesting for the consumers of information. So please keep in mind that that's for the consumer of information. Please ask questions. Try to speak for maximum 5-7 minutes and give the chance to people to ask questions. So we'll give the floor to Hlib Strygunenko. Good morning, dear colleagues. I will say a few words on behalf of the Governmental Office on European Integration. I'd like to welcome the participants of this roundtable. I would like to wish us a fruitful discussion. The issue, we are the subdivision of the Secretariat of the Cabinet of Ministers, and our main function is monitoring, control and analysis of the activity of the governmental offices and monitoring of the situation of implementing European norms into our legislation and regulations. The discussion today is very important, taking into account the fact that soon we'll be marking the anniversary of Maidan. Ukraine, having signed the association agreement, has taken commitments to implement reforms in all the sectors of the economy of Ukraine and in our life. Today we are talking about environmental protection and transportation according to statistical data. I will be giving you approximate figures, but they're very impressive. Annually, about 4.5 million tons of emissions. We have up to 10 tons of waste per person. We have more than 300 million tons of waste a year because of the what we have inherited from Soviet times. We have more than 1 1,000 of artificial water reservoirs in the country. The volume of accumulated waste is more than 12.5 billion tons. We have about 30,000 waste dumps. We have a big problem. We need to add some multipliers to that. We process about 6% of waste, and in the EU they process 90% of waste. So implementation of the environmental part of association agreement, and that is chapter 5. These are articles 360, 365, 366, addendum 30, which has 29 directives and regulations which are to be implemented within certain deadline. So the agreement has become an indicator for our, or the beacon of for our reforms, and the incentive to reform our environmental policy. And this should be based on main principles: openness of data, online statistics, online monitoring, integrated nature of environmental policy, the priority of environmental aspects in different sectors of economy, and that is the system of environmental management, strategic planning, and enhancing efficiency of protection of environment. And one of the priorities is climate change, adaptation of legislation, and that is what we have started talking about. I'd like to emphasize that approximation of the legislation to EU legislation without its implementation at the regional level will be just the process without any result, because taking into account the process of decentralization which is taking place here, the regional, all the reforms have the regional aspect. That is why we need to attract local authorities to implement this policy and to implement the association agreement. The next item is public consultations, access to environmental information in accordance with European directives. There's such a directive 2011/92. The access of the public to this environmental information will mean that there will be discussion of the programs and projects which have an impact on the environment and human health. We now need to implement in our country following all the laws that are to be passed. We need to do the following. The local authorities, the local communities, they will have the chance to order the environmental assessment impact for all of their projects. And the same is true when we're talking about environmental assessment when it comes to this projects of strategical development. and the results which we will receive after approximation of legislation will mean the reforms. Today we have a big problem of waste management. Especially when it comes to hazardous waste. We have problem with fires at the waste collection sites, and that is all in the EU directives. If we introduce new legislation and regulations, all these things will be regulated, and we need just to see that it is regulated like it's done in civilized countries. Second, forest management and water resource management, increasing water preserve territories, and we don't have enough of them compared with other countries. Also, pollution of rivers and quality of air. All these topics are of importance. Now, yesterday the strategy on waste management was passed by the government. This document has been developed together with the EU experts for more than a year, and it provides for almost the norms of European legislation and regulations. Yesterday, another very important document was adopted, and that is National Action Plan of reducing the emissions. That action plan was drafted with the support of European experts, from Czech experts. They did it back in 1992. Ukraine has the commitment to improve the quality of air, and such zones as different thermal power plants, coal plants. They have enhanced emissions of dust and nitrogen oxide and sulfur oxide in Europe. Back in the 70s and in the 80s, these facilities are maximum safe. There's an energy facility, they have a pipe, a chimney, and we have chimneys that emit thousands of tons of dust, of solid particles, but in Europe it's just steam which is coming out of such chimneys. In order to get it implemented here, we need 16 years. That's what technical experts calculated, European and our experts calculated. Now we will need to explain to public this needs to be explained to public. But very often such issues are of interest for experts, but it's about the health of our citizens, especially those who live not far from such facilities. That is why it's very important that the strategy of waste management and the national plan are implemented. It's very important. Our companies, especially the facilities of thermal generation, which operate on coal, they are private, but the private business should invest not just into expansion of production, but into the citizens, into the health, into environmental protection, into the social sector. That means a lot of money, but once we are approximating Europe, we need to do it. So now back to reform. The reform, for example, the reform of monitoring, environmental monitoring. That is what depends on the state. This reform is to reduce in the future the number of non-sanctioned killings of animals or non-sanctioned waste dump fields, dump sites, and also talking about electric power plants which operate in private sector and which have their plants. They have to include into their plans the public health aspect. And 2 words about transportation. I believe that my colleagues have very interesting information for you on transportation. And we value the support of European Commission in order for the to approximate our legislation to European standards. We need to pass the basic laws in accordance with the EU Association Agreement, and we need to liberalize our waterways. We need to introduce European standards in the whole transportation sector. We appreciate that support, and we have an active dialogue, and so that this dialogue is active at the local level, we are open for that. We'll be helping you. Thank you, Hlib.
Thank you, Gleb. So that was said correctly. A lot depends on activists and journalists who are, in a good sense, really help the public and provide additional leverage for control of the power. I would like to give the floor to Yevhen Katkov, who will tell us about one of the components, a very interesting combination of words, intellectual transport system. At the Ministry of Infrastructure, we have many projects directed to improve the lives of business and people, and I will tell you about automobile transport, because a lot of people are interested in this topic, and with the support of the International Bank, there are experts in the automobile organization to introduce intellectual systems, and in Europe at the legislative level, in one of the directives, it is stated that all the members of the EU should introduce such systems. So What are these systems? They influence the safety of movement, and also they influence on ecology. And there are special screens, for example, that inform people about traffic jams. Also, this is a big, serious system, and Europe went only along halfway, and in future it is planned that all the vehicles will be equipped with a special equipment, and when a car is moving to the city, they will be provided with information about parking and other issues. So we made only first steps, and this is introduction of way control, and everyone knows about the number of roads that is being built, but this won't lead to any positive things if we will drive the same way, because the allowed weight is 40 tons, and modern vehicles can bring more than 100 tons, and that's why we need to increase control and increase fines. And Укртрансбезпека bought mobile complexes, but there is human factor. They should stop the car and weigh this car. And one of the components of the intellectual transport system is weigh complexes, weight in motion. So there is a special big frame that is installed. I would like to show how the system works. Let's start the video. Click the mouse and we will see what I want to explain. So this slide. The main problem is near Kiev. In 2014, they built one of the complexes, and they assessed the number of the cars that are overloaded. We have statistics only for 2014, but overload was about 30% of the cars they were with this overload. And according to information of European experts who work for Avtodor, the roads are distracted, they are ruined by these vehicles. That's why all these things will produce effect, and if we won't control these trucks, they will ruin the roads, and this will be an endless process. So what is the meaning of these complexes? So they are installed, and they establish the number of these cars, and if the car is overloaded, so there is a special platform and there is a special control unit of the service, but now we do not have proper legislation for operation. So this is pre-selection, then they are stopped, and the inspector knows clearly what car has an overload, and they stop this car, and this car will be fined. So we can fine 15 or 20%. We need time to stop, to weigh, and to write out a fine. And if we want to start it in automatic regime, we need proper legislation changes that we've developed. And there will be a day of infrastructure in the parliament, and this draft law will be submitted. And in order that the deputies voted for this law, there is a special lobby. The owners of the big trucks, they do not want to have this law because they want to bring 80 tons or 40 tons in one vehicle. But this is unfair competition, and those who are overloaded, they just create dumping. And we developed a pilot project. We have 7-way complexes that will be installed, and they will give the statistics and will work in the pre-selection regime. When we get the statistics, this will be for the deputies, and they will be able to take decisions and will be able to adopt proper legislation on this. And today, we monitored the situation around Kiev, and yesterday I got information that money will be allocated for southern oblasts, Odessa, Kherson, and Mykolaiv oblasts, and in these oblasts there will be these complexes established. And I have a brief note, and here in simple words it is said what this project is about, how it is going to work. I have 10 copies and I can provide them to you. Also, I have 3 presentations on legislation, what it will give and what project will provide for us. Thank you. So you should just put a mouse on the slide and there will be a play screen. So I give the floor to Taras Huk, who is going to tell us about the aspects of traffic safety, road safety. Welcome. Good afternoon. Thank you. And we thank Hlib and Yevhen. I am a representative of NGO. That's why I'm not going to speak about the work of the Cabinet of Ministers and other governmental institutions. I would like to tell what our organization works with, and we also deal with the standards and implementation of standards that are in the association agreement. So first, road safety is not good in Ukraine compared with the European countries, and if in Ukraine we have 10 people that die on the roads, and this is 4,000-5,000 people a year, and if we compare per 1,000 of population, this is many more than in other countries, and our indicators of death and trauma on the roads in 5 years, in the last 5 years, they do not decrease. And in the European Union, they decrease the death and trauma on the roads, and in Ukraine, it is difficult to say that the state really do enough in this. And recently, the government discussed safety roads until 2020 with the participation of Avtodor and the Ministry of Infrastructure, and they described the road safety based on a report of the World Bank, and they allocate, and this is understandable, that the main problem in Ukraine is that majority of drivers do not adhere to safety rules, and this provoke a big number of accidents. Next is infrastructure. The cities and the roads, intercity roads, they should be safe, and the consequences of accidents should not be as critical as, for example, in Kharkiv, when in one road accident 6 people died, and this is the problem of the state and how roads in the cities are built. And here, infrastructure aspects, we hope that starting 2018, there will be the road fund, and that will be money allocation for safety infrastructure. These will be special safety measures on roads that will allow more road safety, and this will be a proper effect. And what we deal with, we try to accelerate the process in order to introduce proper laws, and we developed two draft laws that are in the parliamentary committee. Mustafa Nayaman provided these draft laws, and also at the preliminary stage we have draft law 5346, and we believe that these 3 draft laws will be voted by the parliament, and this will improve safety of roads, and they will provide also the better regulation of parking, and there will be automatic recording, and also other draft laws concerning changes of legislation regarding control of traffic rules. And our traffic rules are not bad, but the control is not good, and the drivers, they see that their violations are not recorded, and these and also the code is of 1984, so the police and other law enforcement bodies, they use this law, and the philosophy of this law and the norms are not good. We should have a new draft law, but this is a long process, and we proposed 5 key proposals that can improve situation 80%. They are easy for understanding, and the 3rd draft law is concerning the drunk driving, and according to the World Bank and other experts, they are the key reason of traffic accidents, and we can, if the driver didn't violate traffic rules, and if he is drunk, it is impossible to arrest him, and it raises concern that there can be some violations in this. So we have now a transitional space. There should be centers of soberness that exist in the Baltic states and Canada, the United States, and they establish proper signs, and police officers stop the traffic movement and check all the drivers, and also we regulate the procedure concerning medical institutions, and that should be improved. So on the whole, this will produce effect, but at the same time we believe that introduction of automatic recording of violations of rules should be established, and we are the only country where we do not measure the speed and where there is no system of automatic recording, and the law on the law of 2015 provides this, but it contradicts the constitution, and I call on the ministry to work more efficiently, especially the Ministry of Internal Affairs, in order to control and record the speed. And in 2009, we had a Vizier system. In half a year, the number of traffic accidents was reduced by half. Then it was rejected because it contradicted the constitution, but when the system was installed, the traffic safety increased.
Thank you, Taras. I believe now you can understand why we selected transportation and ecology, because we all want changes. We were discussing with colleagues that we can talk about quality of products, but we got scared that then there will be too many questions asked, and that's why we moved to another subtopic of our conversation. And that's about our everyday life. And I would like to give the floor to Oleksandr Semenetz. Good afternoon. I see that you have what is left for environmental issues. That's looking at the watch. I will not talk about all the environmental problems that we face, but I will just mention about some problems in the sphere of waste management. So I will talk about things which are of interest for regional authorities. Yesterday, the National Strategy of Waste Management was approved by the government in association agreement. We have 3 directives on waste management, and there are 3 of such directives. The national strategy is based on the 3 European directives. But we invited to developing the strategy people who helped us to incorporate into that also some other directives of the EU. I will quickly say a few words about the strategy, what it means and what will be the principles. That's the first document, as the minister said yesterday. This is the document which will become the basis for further development of the legislation. The economy of closed cycle. European Community in December of 2015 adopted the action plan of transfer to closed cycle economy. In 2019 they will see the first results. We are just making the first steps. We all know that the scratch metal is processed into metal, paper waste is processed into paper, but we want to also add to that the use of natural resources, and we want to enhance the share of use of secondary raw materials. We are not talking about waste burial, but we are talking about waste management and processing. Directive 98 defines the hierarchy and priorities in waste management. First priority is prevention of creation of waste, and the last position is removal of waste. First, we prevent waste creation, and there are many ways how this could be done. So we prevent waste creation, then we use them for the second time, then the third stage is processing, recycling. That is what I've mentioned. And the waste paper into paper, the scratch metal into metal. After that, there's utilization, and if the waste cannot be recycled, then there's a process of removal. It's not just burial. And everything should be done in accordance with the Directive 31, according to all environmental standards. Another principle,
So another principle, the principle of broadening of responsibility of the producer, when the producer is responsible for his products, not only at the stage of production and consumption, but also when it turns into wastes. The producer should organize the systems and implement the measures to collect the waste of these products and to provide processing of these products, and different systems are introduced concerning the responsibility of the producer and the processing of wastes. And if we consumed some product in some package, so this package should go back to the cycle, should be processed, and then the producer will have a resource to produce new products using these processed materials. So this is a social responsibility of business. They are responsible, and the state should have controlling function. They should establish minimum norms of the collection and processing of wastes. Technical problems. So the strategy consists of 6 components. 6 the most problematic and important categories: household, industrial, and specific types of wastes, electronic equipment, medical equipment, and used batteries, used accumulators. So household wastes in the structure, they only have 3.5%, but this is waste our citizens face daily, and maybe the journalists of regional media, they should highlight the topic of household wastes. About household wastes, we propose to introduce the mechanisms of interregional and intermunicipal cooperation. The strategy envisages the plan national plan, and then the regional plans on waste management will be developed based on national plan, and this should include intermunicipal cooperation. The south of Ukraine, Odessa, Mykolaiv, Kherson oblasts, maybe they should cooperate among themselves and to create one or two polygons, and there should be sorting lines, and only small number of wastes will be in this waste dumps, and this should be done due to the cooperation between municipalities. So now we give the floor to civil society organizations that really contribute in this. So the presentation is on the site of the Ministry of Natural Resources. It is in the form of 15-minute video. So we can provide a link to our site. Good afternoon, everyone. We would like to start with positive things and the national strategy of waste management that was long awaited for 25 years, and for tens of years the activists really promoted the idea, and we thank the minister who really our partner, and we thank the organizations and experts who worked on the strategy. And for expert organizations, the cartoon and presentation is not enough. In the recent years, the experts organized the plan of the strategy, and they didn't see the strategy, and they didn't analyze concept, and the experts had many questions, and partly the answers were provided, fully provided, we cannot say. And they passed, and yesterday in the afternoon they adopted the national strategy on waste management, and during this day there is no final text. So we would like to see not the cartoon on the official site, but we would like to see an official text, and we would like to see it today in order to promptly analyze it and to create a comparative table what is assessed by the experts. And there were several texts. So what text was really adopted?
These are logistical issues, and we in the committee have been fighting for many of these things for 14 years, and this year we can believe that we have come out of the dead-end situation, and we can believe that in Ukraine the public now has access to information. That was the common home task for the public and for the government, so that we really resolve the situation which deteriorates our international image. But now we see that the government is doing the same as back many years ago Kuchma was doing, not allowing the public to participate in some things. Then there is a trend which is not very correct in the ministry. There are several working groups set up because the ministry itself cannot cope with 20 directives. That's the biggest number of directives in our ministry, which are to be approximated to national legislation. And the next speaker will mention that. I will not talk about the main idea of ecologization of all the chapters of the agreement. Environmental policy, it's not just in one addendum, it's not just for one ministry, it's all over the agreement. And many other ministries are to be working on that. There are several working groups set up. These working groups include some experts who pro bono are ready to work on approximation of directives. We cannot find who's in these working groups in the new website. Maybe they forgot to add who's in the working group. There's no time, there's no schedule of work of these working groups. There are no draft minutes or no minutes of these working groups meetings. Would like to see the minutes of the working group at the Ministry of Regions. So we would like to see the minutes of the meeting of that group. Where are the minutes of the group which was considering the latest draft of the strategy? Maybe the journalists will continue their investigations and maybe they will find this official information. Because yesterday in the afternoon we saw some reposts from the words of the minister, but not a single expert said anything because there's no official version. Now, on the situation in general, the position of the Minister of Environment is correct. Until the national strategy is passed, until the law on the waste is passed, the parliament has no right to pass any law which is the law of lobbying different aspects for business in the sphere of waste management. And there's a draft law 4735D, which introduces green tariff, but the schemes are not clear there, and they're very similar to introducing green tariff for the development of hydro energy. And thanks to this corruption schemes, there are many small mountain rivers and Carpathian mountains disappeared. Introducing such green tariff for electricity generated from waste burning has no official economic substantiation for the ratio which is used there. There are amendments introduced into existing laws, and there are many of such laws. But our ministry, the Ministry of Environment, is not included into this work, and we got the official response that tariffs are not within their competence. Co-authors of this draft law are too powerful and not poor politicians. We request the ministry to not to support any lobbyist law in the parliament. Also, not to violate the public rights. And I believe that by common efforts we will be able to achieve much more than we have achieved. Thank you.
And we understood that the problems we face, so we won't start a discussion here. Maybe a brief comment should be provided, because there should be a brief comment from the ministry. I would like to remind to you that we opened the potential of the topic to the regional media. And let's not provoke discussions that are technical and professional, because we understand that you, as people who work in this sector, you have a lot of different arguments. So short comment from the government. We developed a plan of measures on implementation of the agreement that is now being worked on with the Ministry of Natural Resources, and we will have the draft laws that are planned that should be directed to Eurointegration. Those draft laws of the deputies that are lobbied, they can guarantee they will be scrutinized, and we will have clear conclusions. And according to our procedure, it will go to the Vice President and Premier in order that to take decisions. So they will undergo an expert assessment and will be verified for compliance with European legislation. So you said that you didn't have this final version, that you could not find it, but the Ministry of Natural Resources is not involved. Now the Secretariat deals with this and assigns the strategy and publishes the strategy. So this is question not to the Ministry of Natural Resources. Once again, the strategy, starting November last year, working groups were created, and people could express their opinion and proposals. And on the 13th of July, the strategy was published on the site of the Ministry of... No, I would like to explain this to people. The main requirements. So you had time to express your opinion. So what we are speaking about, there was a project we worked with the civil society in it, but in final stage it was in the Cabinet of Ministers, and there were some corrections, and also when it is on the site, so you will be able to comment on this. So please speak closer to mics in order that people could hear you and interpreters could hear you. And so about the final version, we know that at the Cabinet of Ministers, the provision of the participation of the government, this is one document was reduced from 60 pages to 16. That's why we want to see the document that we are discussing now. So we have only 5 minutes for you.
Okay, I will try to speak very quickly and briefly. What are the main problems that we have with waste and hazardous waste, especially? We have the problem with everyday waste management, and when we had a trip with the assistance of European Commission. We saw that even in Poland they address these problems not like here in Ukraine. If in Kiev we burn the waste at the Energia plant, we have no filters and all the emissions, cancerogenious emissions get into the air. That means that Kievites breathe these toxic substances. The waste is brought from Pakistan and India to Fastiv plant to get burnt. What do they do in Poland? On our website we have information on integrated system of waste management. Today there are many proposals being initiated on making RDF fuel. What is it? There should be no polyvinyl chlorides in it. It could be burnt only on cement plants. Cement plants are not ready to receive these RDF. If investors come to you and if they offer to you some devices for burning the waste using the method of pyrolysis, then don't buy them. We will give you the information on where you can read about all the details of how to correctly manage waste. What about hazardous waste? We say that we have many directives, 3 basic ones on waste. Also, there are several directives which are on industrial waste. But today, Ukraine is at the level of African countries, and we signed the agreement on association, but in fact the picture is awful. The previous leadership of Ministry of Environment issued licenses to 300 companies for hazardous waste management. How were they issuing these licenses? Starting from 2016, 102 license holders were inspected, and we found violations in all of them. 56 licenses were cancelled. Today, the State Regulatory Service makes decision on cancelling the orders on cancelling licenses. They basically resume the activity of such companies. And what is the problem? The companies that have license for collection and transportation of licenses, they submit their documents for tenders, and they wait and they win the tenders for utilization of waste. They don't transfer this waste to anyone. They dump it into rivers, into forests, and we have massive contaminations. The State Regulatory Service issues the permit for inspections to the Ministry of Environment. The Ministry of Environment, when they saw that somewhere there are accumulators which were dumped in the forest, they cannot do inspections. Only if the State Regulatory Service gives approval to that inspection. Today, Ukraine sets the 4th place on death rate and the result of the diseases and influence of toxic substances and hazardous substances. We are at the level of Zambia, Uganda, and other African countries. 1,260 people die annually because of that. So all this hazardous waste management is now regulated by the state service. But there's one more problem, pesticide management. The ministry registered about 1,100 pesticides which are used in the agricultural sector. Not single one of them is controlled by the state. The state service doesn't have the laboratory for that. The state environmental inspection has not a single laboratory which could inspect at least one or control at least one, not 1,000. So Ukraine has become a test field for utilization of pesticides which are prohibited even in the countries like Belarus, Russia. Pesticides are brought to the territory of Ukraine which are not controlled, which are used by agricultural companies. And in the result, people in villages take children to the city in summer because they basically pour the pesticides on heads of people in the villages. The bees die in thousands. I will provide all the facts for journalists, but we asked the police how many applications they were sent in Rivne region. In 2017, there were 47 applications sent to the police, and there was not a single fact of establishing that there was contamination. We say that we're going to Europe, but talking about control, talking about the responsibility, we are at the level of African countries. That's the situation in our country, unfortunately. We have all these materials. Please share your materials. Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Because basically your what you were talking about is about the content of our panel. You have 5 minutes. I will try to be the last one to speak is a privilege, but I would like to say that we can see well how much our authorities act in non-coordinated manner. And talking about state regulatory service, we do not understand what their function is. They allow the inspections and they create corruption risks themselves. But we have the administrative reform. Why do we need this body? Especially if it regulates everything, sacrificing the health of people. Let's recollect that the minister and the Ministry of Environment were always supporting the position that we first develop the principles, we adopt them, and then we conduct we draft all the bylaws and regulations. And the MPs have submitted about 30 draft laws, but let's look at the quality of these draft laws. If you want to look at it, this is the draft law number 35D. If you want to look at it, it's on definitions. The terminology is very strange. They continue to use classification of waste, which was used in Ukraine in the past. They ignore European classification. In Europe, it's not 4 but 3 classes of waste. They could be dangerous, and they have these 4 classes, but terminology, they are very slow with the terminology despite all these definitions. And also one of the latest ways of management is dumping that on on the special test fields, and that is the norm is that dumping could be done only after the special processing, but that affects the cost and infrastructure. Also, it's interesting for local authorities, for journalists who write about these problems in the regions. There's such innovation. If, well, you understand, reading the law, you understand that it's just for green tariff and for getting super profits. But this introduces operator intermediary, some company, intermediary company, which will be just basically will be there to collect money from the population, and they will have the right to define whether the transporter, they will be able to select the transporter, and there's an opportunity provided to create non-competitive conditions for tenders and for work of such companies. And such rules are to be unified, and that's the case when such things cannot be delegated to every community depending on their preferences. Also, this law is that burning is suggested as a wonderful source of energy, but such requirements are ignored as restrictions on efficiency in accordance with European requirements. It's not allowed to refer burning of waste as one of the acceptable methods if this is lower than a certain ratio. Our MPs believe that in our waste there are such wonderful fractions as gum, and that is what cannot be burnt. because these are the most toxic substances which harm mostly the health of people. But this also could be a raw material, and when processed could be used for other needs. And in order to make it safe, for that money is needed, which no green tariff will be able to cover. And European Commission gone, the time is over. The European Commission indicated that when selecting the method of management, they said that further economic stimulation of burning could lead to the assets becoming the loss-making, taking into account the low professional level of the draft laws in the Verkhovna Rada, and also taking into account the fact that we have the authority which is to be drafting such laws. In the future, all the draft laws are to be drafted by the Ministry of Nature, of Environment. I'd like to emphasize that the UCMC is for journalists and for governmental institutions and for mass media. Is the communication platform. The journalists can get information from us. If you have any additional questions or if you got ideas on on getting additional information, please address our experts directly or address us, and we'll ensure this contact. There's an opportunity to ask for questions, and you have half a minute for that, and we'll give 1 minute to experts to answer. 1, 2, 3, 4. Please introduce yourself. To Hlib. Besides emissions and waste that Hlib mentioned in the beginning, in the rural areas, especially in the south of Ukraine, we have many non-identified poisonous chemicals from the Soviet times, which contaminate groundwaters because they are just buried. And you have not mentioned, but there were 5 warehouses that exploded, and it's great because it didn't result in chemical weapons. NATO helps us a lot in utilization. There are NATO programs. There's European Union who helps us. But we have many universities, many departments of chemistry. How do we use Ukrainian potential? Is there one single coordinator who would unite our scientists so that they train the specialists on utilization, because we don't have it now. Thank you. Who can answer?
I would like to try. In Ukraine, we have many universities who have chemist departments, and utilization is taught to them how it should be done. And in Ukraine, there are military ecologists who also deal with these issues. And about these dangerous substances, there was a program of concerning these pesticides, but now state does not have money for this, and journalists should highlight these issues, otherwise people won't be able to resolve these issues. Moskiewska, Pushkinska.net. I would like to ask Hlib. You said that private companies should be socially responsible and utilize their wastes, but do we have some legislative mechanisms for this? And do we have some fines, how to force them to be socially responsible? And also I have one more question to Yevhen. That way complexes, we know that our governor presented a program that is called Smart Region, in the framework of which there will be 9 complexes established in the region. Do you know about it? So speaking briefly, yesterday they adopted a national plan, and I would like to say about it based on this. According to European methodology, such a plan is voluntary when the company goes to the state and say, I cannot implement these obligations this year, but I am obliged to do this in the next years. And when we adopted the document, we saw that such mechanism as national plan in our legislation is not so obliging mechanism like they have it in Europe. So this document corresponds to European practice, but its implementation will depend first on goodwill of the companies that undertook such obligations, that provided all necessary information and said that they will introduce such technologies. And second, it will depend on the plan of actions to realize this plan that the Ministry of Coal will present in the Cabinet of Ministers, and also there will be the issue of stimulation of some companies to implement measures, and also the issues of responsibility in case they do not implement the obligations. And this will be in the stage of implementation of this document, and business in Europe is more civilized, more responsible, roughly speaking. And today there is no rigid measures here how to force the companies to implement this. So concerning air pollution by electricity stations, we have the Ministry of Natural Resources, and they are responsible for permits and fines. But these modern mechanisms, when the company undertakes obligations, we should control this, and the fines are not so big in order to stimulate faster change. So we should work on it. So, Evgeny, do you have any connection to these way complexes in the region? No, but we had a meeting with the Deputy of Ministers, and the governors were invited, and he asked them to participate in this project. So your governor maybe joined to this project. Now there is a specification developed based on best world practices concerning these way complexes, and they will be united in one single system. So we hope that this will be introduced throughout Ukraine. So this meeting was about 2 months ago. Irina Kiparenko, freelance journalist from Odessa. Ratings appear about the pollution in the city, and Odessa is usually on the top of the rating, and many people believe that in Mariupol the air is more polluted, but Odessa is higher in the rating, and we feel that the air is not good, but we do not we do not feel worse than Mariupol. But we have journalists from Mariupol here as well. So I do not know about the air, but the streets are really dirty and the water in the sea. So maybe this is a rhetorical question. There are objective so there are special installations, and we have objective data. The pollution is measured, and look, they assess. For example, we have posts that measure concentration of substances that pollute the air, and we have graphs, and we know, and this is the meteorological service posts that can provide some information. This is open data. This data can be interpreted by different organizations, but if we look at objective data, we can create some graphs, some ratings, and if some indicators are higher in Odessa than in Mariupol, this can be provided by some separate post. So the last question, Yulia Sveshchenko, Mariupol city site. So I would like to say that in the territory of Mariupol we have 2 metallurgy plants. One of them is Hlib plant, and Azovstal. It is in the first. This is the biggest contaminator of water, and each third resident of Mariupol has allergy. And concerning oncology, in Mariupol we have 30% more cases than in Donetsk Oblast. So I would like to ask, you've said that yesterday the national strategy was adopted, and we still cannot read this document, but maybe the fines were increased for contamination, for air pollution. Maybe norms of pollution was increased or decreased. So this is the national plan. This is different. So and what about the system of control? To whom do you address the question? So the last remarks. Maybe this is to the Ministry of Natural Resources, but we spoke a lot about control today, and in order not to face the situation when there is, we should speed up the reform, as it was said, the reform of the system of environmental control. We have the inspection that is not in effect, and we face such problems, right? Speaking briefly, the national strategy is not a panacea. This is only a first very important step. And why everyone is happy about its adoption? Because for the first time the system will be built correctly, then the plan will be introduced, but none of the laws will work because we should establish proper control. It should be independent. And this is not the service. This is a separate, transparent body. So people do not know what it should be. And now there are negotiations and also the control without rigid legal responsibility. And we said about the fines. In many cases, these fines are really small, and these some plants, they just pay these fines or give a bribe, and it is easier for them than to carry out proper work. So transparent European control that will be online, it won't give anything if there won't be strict responsibilities. So there should be a proper control and monitoring, and there should be strict legal responsibility, but the overall system will work if we change our attitude, and environment should be a priority, and you should raise the environmental awareness of people. So let's keep to agenda. We have a clear scheme in Europe. We can just transfer this.
Я хочу подякувати нашим спікерам за те, що ви прийшли і надали інформацію для роздумів і для матеріалів. Я сподіваюся, журналістських, що сприятиме підвищенню нашого екологічного і внутрішнього контролю і транспортного.
So there should be proper control. We understood that we spent 1 hour 40 minutes, but we can speak about it until evening. But we should end our panel, and we have 3 minutes of break. We thank our